I'm not seeing them then. There he is.
Hello.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
I certainly can. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, it's weird because your name just now popped in to the
Oh.
waiting room.
Yeah. Sorry. I've emailed you a couple times saying it just has me in the waiting room.
Yeah,
I've been here like 5:15.
yeah, I saw your email
Okay,
and
great.
and so it's just about time to get started. I just need to make you a co-host
Okay.
and how do you want to start? Do you want to put your screen share up right away or just have you talk for a minute before you? That's up to you. Totally.
Whatever you prefer.
I'll just come on. I'll introduce you.
Okay.
And sorry about the mix up. I did see your email and that's why I'm like, wait, he's not in a waiting room. But we got you. You're here. Yay.
Knock on wood.
Okay, I'm going to start. I got a bunch of people to admit here, so
Okay.
I'm going to start that. Okay. Everybody, we're just about to get started here. I'm just admitting some people, if you could bear with me for a moment, and then we'll get started.
After this weekend's explosion on the bridge linking Russia to
Okay. If you haven't already, if you could mute yourselves so we don't have any auxiliary sound effects from, that would be great. Okay, we still got, I'm going to give everybody a couple more minutes to get in here and then we'll get started. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to get everybody. Oh, we still got people coming in. We're okay. I got a yeah, we can hear you, so that's great. Okay, welcome everybody to this presentation through the Lyon Township Public Library via Zoom. And our guest tonight, or our guest host tonight, is Chad Lewis. He's the title of the program is called Michigan's Most Haunted Locations, and Chad is an author or a co-author on several books having to do with haunted locations in various states. So he's definitely an expert on the subject. So with no further ado, let's have Chad get going. Can you introduce yourself,
and welcome everyone. First, I'd like to thank the library for putting this together this evening. But just as important, all of you who were brave enough to show up to talk about the most haunted places of Michigan from the safety of wherever you're watching this program from. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you here. So hopefully all of you can see the haunted locations of Michigan on your screen. As you heard, my name is Chad Lewis. I'll be your presenter for this program. And although my background is actually in the field of psychology, for the last nearly 30 years, I've been traveling the world in search of the strange and unusual. Everything from hunting for vampire legends in Transylvania, looking for the Loch Ness Monster, crop circles, UFOs, alien abductions, you name it. If it's strange and bizarre and offbeat, I've traveled the world in search of this folklore, these weird anomalies. But what I discovered on my travels is that sometimes the weirdest things happen right in your own backyard. So that's what we're going to explore tonight. Some of the most haunted locations that your state has to offer. For the next 45 minutes or so, we'll take a tour across the entire state, ending up right back in town. Now, I'm going to give you the background, the folklore, the eyewitness accounts. I'll talk a bit about some of the research I do at these locations. Heck, I'll even provide you with the directions to these places. But I'm going to leave it up to each and every one of you to travel to these places on your own and determine for yourself whether or not you believe these legends are true. But I should warn you, it's much easier watching these places on television than it is visiting. When you are out in the middle of nowhere and you see that shadowy creature lurking from tree to tree, you simply can't turn to another channel and forget all about it. So with that, let's explore some of the scariest places that Michigan has to offer. Let's begin our trip with the UP. And it's a great place to begin because we all know only trolls live under a bridge. So we'll talk about the Northwoods stories. And there's no more infamous haunting in the UP than that of the Paulding Light in Watersmeet. Now, what's interesting about this location that on any given night, you can go out here and see dozens of cars all waiting to see this mysterious ghost light, this spook light that will hang out in the country along the old electrical lines by the railroad. For decades, people have talked about this light appearing, darting around, changing in size, shape, and color as it maneuvers its way through the area. Some believe they've captured photographic evidence of this light. You'll see photos all over of this alleged light. When I first went there, I brought a ton of equipment looking for any indication as to why people were seeing this mysterious light. Skeptics have claimed for years that it's nothing more than the headlights and taillights of a nearby road reflecting off into the Watersmeet area. But the only problem with that explanation is that these mysterious ghost lights, they predate any vehicles being in the area. One of the main legends as to why you will see a dancing ball of light out there tells that years ago, a railroad employee whose job was to light up a lantern at night to signify the train was coming by so it could slow down, overslept, did not wake up and light the lantern. The train crashed and many people lost their lives in a fiery end at the location. The grief and sorrow was too much for him. He took his own life, could not deal with it. And now he continues to make sure he's waving his lantern through the area, even from the grave. There have been numerous documentaries about this phenomena. One of my favorite stories tells of people being chased out of the area by this ball of light. They were camping in the woods and it chased them out. In fact, when I was first there, as I was leaving with a colleague of mine and made it downtown, the police pulled him over, said his lights weren't working. He said, that's impossible. It's a brand new car. But he got out and sure enough, the lights weren't working. But when we restarted the car, worked fine. We didn't know it at the time, but people have had all sorts of electrical disturbances out there. Their vehicles' batteries will die. They'll have to be towed out of the area. One documentary even had the tagline of, for years, you've been afraid of the dark. Now you'll be afraid of the light, which I thought was a very clever marketing campaign for the Paulding light. Of course, when I talk about haunted places, people often think of cemeteries. And the reason being is quite simple. Back when cemeteries were chosen, they were thought to serve as a portal between our world and the spirit world. So when your loved one passed on, it would just be easier for them to travel from our world to whatever world you believe they go to. But regardless of whether or not you believe this theory, there are many cemeteries in Michigan where it seems to be working in reverse, that the living are not moving to the dead are coming into our world. First stop, a father and daughter reunion. What a wonderful story this would make. People love family reunions. In fact, as half of the Hallmark Christmas movies you'll watch every year are these heartfelt family reunions. But this one's a little more sinister and a little more deadly because it tells the tale in 1883 of the Couch family being killed at their farmstead. The father, Jacob Crouch, and his daughter and several others that passed on. They were buried out in the local cemeteries. And now the legend tells that they continue to meet up even after death. Believe it or not, many people will see what appears to be the ghostly apparition of a woman walking from the cemetery, from a nearby cemetery into this cemetery, where she disappears right over the gravestone of her father. Is believed to be the ghost of the daughter looking to reconnect with her father, even in the afterlife. Most people talk about it happening in the evening, especially if you can get there on the evening of November 21st, which is the anniversary of the murders. You will see her making her way through the area. And with Halloween fast approaching, people love scary stories of creatures, stories, legends, and the like, especially when it comes to legends of witches. But the legends of Michigan's witches are not those of Hollywood, because in Hollywood, every witch is a supermodel and it's not scary at all. But the stories around the state tell of a more bizarre and deadly witch legend. We have today, you won't find much there. It's a nearly forgotten town. People left and abandoned this place after a series of diseases swept through and tore through the community. Out at the old historical cemetery, the legend tells that there was once a witch in the community. And in order to stop her from practicing the dark arts, from bringing evil to the village, they killed this witch and buried her out at the graveyard. And now legend tells that if you're brave enough or foolish enough to make your way through, you will encounter the vengeful spirit of this witch looking to get her revenge on those who took her life so many years ago. Now, what's interesting is this is also a spot people have seen weird disembodied lights moving about, similar to this artist's rendition, moving throughout the cemetery. This cemetery is in the middle of absolutely nowhere. If there's one place that looks like it should be haunted, it's this one. So the odds that people are out there hiding in the woods talking while you're there, very slim, but yet that's what people report. Going out there, hearing people talking, but they can never make out what the people are saying. Others have seen what appear to be the ghostly spirits of young children moving through the cemetery. They're thought to be the spirits of those children who passed away when disease rifled through the area. As you can go through the cemetery and see the closeness of death dates on many of the children buried inside the cemetery. One quick note, if you were thinking of taking something from the cemetery, be very careful. Legend tells that if you take anything from the cemetery, whether it's a branch or some garbage, you'll be cursed with bad luck until the day you die or the day you bring it back and release the curse or relieve it from coming after you. A lot of people today talk about the Michigan Triangle, which runs from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, over to Ludington and down to Benton Harbor. It's a place of mystery and intrigue. Seems to be a paranormal beacon, a portal of sorts. What the late researcher John Keel, best known for his Mothman prophecies, would have called a window area where all sorts of weirdness takes place on the lake, starting with all the old lake monster stories of the lake. Dating back hundreds of years, people have seen giant leviathan of the deep coming out of the waters during the Triangle area. You can find newspaper articles flooding the old newspapers about these creatures. Skeptics claimed it was nothing more than maybe a school of carp or an escaped sea lion from the circus that was causing all of these sightings. It's also here I've collected numerous UFO sightings over the lake, mysterious lights and craft floating above the water and below. In fact, many people told me they saw the lights coming in and out of the water as though the water wasn't even there. No splash, no wake, no ripples, nothing. But of course, I'm really interested in the haunted stories of Lake Michigan. And those come in the form of the old ghost ship sightings. In fact, on evenings when the fog is really heavy, of course, people see what appear to be ships moving on the lake in the Triangle. At first glance, they appear like they're from the 17 or 1800s. When people try to get a closer look, they simply vanish into thin air, or when they pull out their binoculars or camera, the ships are no longer there. And there may be good reason for some of these ghost ships, including the old Rouse Simmons, which was captained by Herman, known as Captain Santa. He received the moniker because it was his job to sail Lake Michigan all the way from the south up to the north woods of Wisconsin and Michigan in the Christmas tree ship, where he would sail up every December or November and fill his trees on his cargo ship, loading up thousands of these trees and heading back to the Chicago, Illinois area, where he would sell them to all the city folk who needed a Christmas tree. He received the moniker Captain Santa because it was said that if you showed up on his ship in need of a Christmas tree, no matter how little money you had, you would walk away with a Christmas tree. This all kept going until November 1912, when he had just filled his ship up with Christmas trees. Rats were scurrying off of the ship, which was a sign of ill fate or doom to come. Many of the other captains refused to go out on the water because the weather was predicted to be so terrible. But Captain Santa said, the people need their Christmas trees and I need to deliver them. So he went out onto the lake and his ship was never seen or heard from again. Well, not exactly. It was spotted again First in 1971, when divers found it on the bottom of Lake Michigan. Amazingly, you can still see the Christmas trees on the ship when the divers encountered it. But that's not the scary part. The scary part comes in the fact that now people see this Christmas tree ship sailing by, loaded with Christmas trees all over it. Again, thinking it's somebody making a cargo run. They're amazed to find that the ship simply vanishes into thin air. One of the most infamous legends in Michigan is that of Seven Gables Road. And it's here that we encounter another home of a witch. It was said that a witch lived out in the house all by herself. Of course, in the old days, any woman living out in the country on her own had to have been a witch. In another version of the story, this home was said to be owned by a man who went crazy. He snapped. He went psychotic, lost his mind, burned down the house with his family still inside, and then either escaped or committed suicide, depending on what version of the story you believe. It was also said that the townsfolk burned it down because the witch was living in it. Regardless of whether either of those versions are true, the house is no longer there. But that doesn't stop curious legend trippers from making their way out there. All sorts of paranormal activity is said to take place. People immediately get a sense that something's not right out there, that they shouldn't be there, that something is watching them. And they experience all sorts of paranormal activity, from hearing their name being called, disembodied voices out there, weird balls of light, odd smells, apparitions, and the like. But it is said the witch still inhabits this area, which is why the legend tells that if you are the last person to come back over the barrier here, the gate, you will be cursed with bad luck until the day you die. Oftentimes, these dares, overwhelming 99.9% of the time, if you do them, something bad will happen. It's never anything good that if you do the dare, you'll find true love or win the lottery. It's always negative things. So if you're going to go out there, make sure you have someone who's a little slower than you coming back, so you're not the last person to venture over this gate. Or head to Jackson to the Hillcrest Memorial Park. Here you have the tragic story of little Mary. She came from a very wealthy family in the area, and she passed away at a young age. Her distraught family put this great marker up in remembrance of their little daughter. But again, that's not the scary part. The scary part comes that the legend tells as soon as young Mary was buried, her mother began having dreams in which the daughter came to her and said, "Mom, help me. I'm buried alive. Save me. Dig me up. Don't leave me. I'm scared." So her mother did what any loving parent would do. Apparently, the mother was said to have dug up several days later the grave of her daughter, where it was said they found her dead, but with deep scratch marks on the top of the coffin, as though she had tried to claw her way outside. And now many people see her spirit wandering the area where she was alleged to have been buried alive. People see the little spirit of a ghostly girl walking about. Others don't see her, but hear the sounds of a girl giggling or singing or playing as they maneuver by her statue. And it's a great legend. It's a great piece of folklore. But was anyone ever buried alive? Well, yes, we know thousands of people were buried alive. We know this because we have thousands of newspaper accounts from the 18 and 1900s where, whether you were in a diabetic shock or in a coma, doctors would often pronounce you dead. But lo and behold, many people, some of which were even at their own funeral, would pop up just in the nick of time to be saved from being buried alive. Now, this fear may seem silly today to us with modern science and medicine, but our grandparents were so afraid of being buried while still alive that they came up with several inventions to stop this. One of those inventions was this. It's called a cemetery bell, and it does or did exactly what it looks like it would do. It was a bell that you could have above your grave with a rope on a pole going down into your casket. So if you awoke in time, all you'd have to do is pull this rope. It would ring the bell and alert the caretaker who lived at the cemetery that you had been buried alive and they could come and rescue you. But there was one problem with this invention, though. On many nights, the wind would set these bells off, giving the caretaker quite a scare, thinking everyone had been buried alive. Today, there's a lot of argument over the origin of the saying "saved by the bell." Many contend it's a boxing expression, where others believe it was literally being saved by the bell. Because for several nights after you died, it was your family's responsibility to sit around your grave, making sure that you were truly dead, that you wouldn't rise up out of the ground. And as evidenced by this photograph here, you can see that in the old days, cemeteries were more multifunctional than they are today. People would have family reunions there. They'd have picnics there. They'd play games. They'd camp and spend the night in cemeteries. Whereas today, we see our cemeteries as nothing more than memorials for our deceased. But 100 years ago, they were used quite frequently for other purposes. Now, earlier, when I made the "only trolls live under the bridge" joke, I was half serious in the fact that bridges play an important part in the folklore of the supernatural. Just as bridges connect water with land here in this realm, many believe they connect the living with the spirits in other realms. But regardless of whether you adhere to this theory, there are a lot of haunted bridges in your state, including in Hemlock, the Dice Road Cemetery and Bridge. One of these places where weird things seem to happen on the road. Again, cars have all sorts of mechanical issues on this out in the middle of nowhere road. One legend tells that many years ago, two young girls went out to the road in a suicide pact, and they took their lives at the end of a rope. And now unsuspecting motorists see them on the side of the road. Those who venture out there and park and get out of their vehicle often see them hanging from the side of the bridge. And at first glance, you might be thinking, this bridge doesn't look high enough to take the lives of a couple people on a rope. And you'd be correct, but this is the new, more modern bridge that replaced the old one, where the legend was said to have its origins. But you don't have to get off on the bridge and look down on the water, because many unsuspecting motorists have been merely driving by when all of a sudden they see what appears to be a woman on the side of the road. Thinking maybe she broke down or needs some assistance, they slow down, only to find that she's nearly transparent and that she vanishes right into thin air. She's also been seen right out in front of the cemetery, where not only have people seen this woman in white, this vanishing hitchhiker, if you will, they've often talked about a cloaked man, a dark figure residing in the cemetery as well. But again, when people try to get close or make out who or what he might actually be, they find that nothing's there, at least not anything they can pick up on. Or head over to East China for the Putty Gut Bridge. This is another location where all sorts of weird things will happen to your vehicle. And for good reason. Many people have been driving down this road when all of a sudden they see what appears to be some sort of old looking vehicle coming toward them, either from in front or approaching very quickly from behind. And as these mysterious lights come faster and faster and get closer and closer, once they get to the spot where you should be able to make out who or what is behind them, they simply disappear into nothing. The legend goes back and tells of a man who was coming home late at night from a nearby bar. He had been drinking all night and was intoxicated and drove his truck over the bridge into the water where he met his watery grave. And now it is said that his vehicle is the one you see mowing you down while you're out there checking it out. Others tell that if you stop your car and park it and put your keys on top of the hood on the roof, the keys will mysteriously vanish and you will not be able to get your car started again. And of course, being that I'm doing a program on Michigan and hauntings, I can't leave out all of your haunted lighthouses. In fact, many people have written books just specifically about all the lighthouse legends in the area. One of my favorites is Big Bay Point Lighthouse. Here, you have to imagine the life of a lighthouse keeper, often very secluded, working in harsh, frozen, isolated, dark, cold atmosphere by yourself in a very dangerous job, which is why many people believe that these places are haunted. One theory of ghosts is that if you die and become a ghost, why wouldn't you hang out at the places you love? Why would you be at a cemetery? Which is exactly maybe the reason why we have so many haunted bars here in my home state of Wisconsin, because people love to hang out there while they're alive. And that's one of the theories at these lighthouses, because people who go out there have weird occurrences happen to them. Oftentimes they'll go out for the day to enjoy the lake. And when they come back, they'll find things have been rearranged in their room, but nothing of value is ever found missing. People will hear walking around at the lighthouse, but allegedly they're there by themselves. Others have seen what appears to be the ghostly image of an old lighthouse keeper, a former keeper of the area. At first glance, they think maybe it's someone dressed up in a period costume, a tour guide of some sort. That is, until you guessed it, they vanish right into a wall or right into thin air or simply disappear. Most people are struck about how old looking the person is, not in terms of their age, but the decade or the era in which they were thought to reside in. Now, if you thought these stories were weird, and granted, they were, these next stories tonight are going to be beyond bizarre, starting with the smallest city in Michigan, the Omar city limit here sign. What I love about this is not only do you get a haunted story here, you get a little bonus as well. Because out in what are known as the Omar Plains, for years, people have been going out there as a sort of lover's lane, a place for the young people to go out away from the prying eyes of law enforcement and their parents. And of course, there are legends of it being haunted. All sorts of weird things are said to take place. And it was said that sometime back in the 40s and 1950s, that they inadvertently stumbled across a sacred burial ground and accidentally started developing some of the area. Not only did this trigger the ghostly haunted legends, but others were out there when all of a sudden they reported seeing something that shouldn't be there, something that couldn't be there, but yet there it was staring right back at them. So what were these people seeing? Well, maybe I better let you just take a look. These things They're called the witchy wolves of Omar Plains. By all accounts, for a lack of a better term, they said they were the size of a bear, but shaped more like a wolf, what we would consider a werewolf, with the long muzzle and the deep, dark, matted down fur, the heavy fangs and claws. And make matters worse is sometimes it would be seen running on all fours, and other times it would be seen as a biped, walking upright on its hind legs like you and I do. What's interesting is when I went there to investigate, I spoke with a couple old timers of the area. One of them told me he remembered living there in the 1950s when teenagers would go out to this lover's lane to get to know one another. And while they were out there, he said oftentimes the girls would come back all clawed apart with their skirts and their clothing, not by the hormones of their suitor, the teenage boys, but by the witchy wolves that they would be attacked out there. Which brings us to the larger legend of the Dog Man of Michigan, this big creature resembling that of a werewolf that has been reported throughout the entire state. And again, it seems something right out of Hollywood, with the pointed ears and the big fangs, something out of your worst nightmares. But don't feel bad. You're not the only people to believe in werewolves or dogmen. In fact, thanks to my good friend and colleague, Linda Godfrey, my home state of Wisconsin is now known as the werewolf capital of the world. It all began when Linda was working as a journalist. She started receiving reports of people traveling down a small stretch of road called Bray Road. There, very similar, the people would see a large werewolf type creature. Oftentimes it was eating roadkill or freshly killed prey out in the middle of nowhere. But the good news is that outside of charging at a couple of vehicles and maybe scratching at some young teenagers in the Omar Plains, these creatures seem to be just as afraid of witnesses as witnesses are of them. And rather than attack and try to devour you, many of them seem more likely to scurry back into the underbrush and remain undetected. So the good news is, if you go out to the Omar Plains or to Bray Road looking for these creatures, most likely you won't die. Well, 50-50, still pretty good odds. Others contend that the witchy wolves are actually hellhounds, giant black dogs with glowing red or green eyes that have been reported throughout history as doing the devil's bidding, guarding portals to hell. And they are a harbinger of death, that if you see one, it means you or someone you know is going to die very shortly. But again, I'll leave it up to you to head to the smallest city and see if there's room for werewolves to linger. Or stop by the old Fenton Hotel, a historic landmark where people believe that it is still being occupied years after the hotel shifted into being a restaurant and bar. And it's here people have seen ghostly images walking through the lobby. Waitresses have had somebody tap them on the shoulder, but when they spin around, nobody's there. People hear all sorts of weird things happening inside the former Stagecoach Hotel. But it is no longer a hotel, so you can't stay there any longer. But this brings me to the question I receive the most. Regardless of where people are, they contact me asking, where can I go to spend the night in a haunted place? Well, if you have that macabre sense of adventure, you're in luck, because in your state, there are numerous locations where you can spend the night in a haunted place. One of my favorites, or least favorite, depending on your outlook, is in Wayne. It's the old Red Apple Restaurant and Hotel, the old Red Apple Inn. Now, a lot of people go here because it's haunted. And don't confuse it. It's not a Holiday Inn. It's a mom and pop motel. There have been numerous deaths taking place in the hotel, from traditional people engaging with one another and having a heart attack to people being murdered in the rooms and in the parking lot. And that's what leads to the haunted stories. People staying here report mysterious rapping and knocking on the doors and windows. Often they'll open the door to find no one there. Objects will move around on their own, all sorts of electrical disturbances. People tend to want to stay in room 117 because of the death that occurred there, and they believe it's haunted. But I talked to many of the staff and workers there and guests who told me all the rooms seem to have paranormal activity, and people have experienced all sorts of things while staying there. Just one of the many locations where you can spend the night in a creepy, sinister location. Or maybe head to Detroit for a little upscale restaurant, a little top-notch service, if you will. And if for that, you go to the Whitney. And of course, people love it. It's a very high-end restaurant and bar. You'll love it. You'll have a great time there. But it's thought to be haunted by the former owner of the place, who loved it so much he continues to go there even from his grave. People have seen his spirit walking through the building and then vanishing. Staff members told me that the night before a big event, they'll set up the tables and the silverware and glassware, only to come in the next morning and find it's been rearranged by some unseen force, as though they're not happy with the setup. Others see on the staircase spirits walking up and down the old elegant staircase. Again, they think maybe it's somebody having a 1800s party and people are dressed up in period costumes, only to find that no such people exist. So much activity happens here, they even named their bar inside the Ghost Bar, because activity just seems to be everywhere. Bottles have been thrown off the wall and set down as though placed by some unseen force. Bar stools will tip over on their own with nobody around them. Great place to visit if, again, you're looking for a little weekend away or a little staycation. You'll have a wonderful time there, even if no ghostly activity happens. Or you can make your way to the old Holly Hotel and Restaurant. This was another popular place for well over 100 years. And what's interesting is, again, many people see a former owner of the location. As they're waiting to get drinks or to be served, they look and see what appears to be a man straight out of the 1800s in a long trench coat, heavy, thick, with a top hat, looking like he just came from a play at the nearby theater. But again, when people try to get a closer look, he vanishes, even though they seem to be accompanied by a weird cigar smoke, that when they see this spirit, all of a sudden they're flooded with the smell of cigar surfacing in the area. Of course, no smoking is allowed at the hotel, the old hotel, and hasn't been for many years, but people get this weird whiff, overcoming scent of a cigar being smoked as well. And it's also here people have seen the ghostly image of a woman walking by. Oftentimes she'll be walking down the steps here using the handrails. And again, people think she's somebody dressed up. That is until she is nearly transparent and is no longer there. What I love about going here is every time I've been here, I've collected new stories from both staff and the patrons that visit. And this is one of those places that are very open about their paranormal activity. They'll be happy to tell you all about the stories of what takes place there. And my favorite story there involves the idea that people come in for the first time and they'll be eating and having drinks when all of a sudden they'll hear the sound of a pool table, billiards being played. But when they ask where the billiard table is, how they can partake, They're told that they have no billiards anymore. All the tables were removed decades ago. But it seems as though the old establishment of the hotel is still continuing to play billiards, even though the game tables are no longer there. Great place to visit. Again, not only if you don't believe in these spirits, you'll have a great sense of Michigan history when you stop at some of these historic locations. And it should be noted, this is also the same town where I recently got another strange report from a woman driving home late at night. It was dark. She was going slow as to not hit any roadkill or any deer or animals that might be in the area. When all of a sudden she saw, digging through a neighborhood garbage can, what she first thought was a raccoon looking for an easy meal. But as she came almost to a stop to take a look, she realized it wasn't a raccoon at all. She reported seeing this thing rummaging through the garbage cans, about 4 feet high with a tail and these bright red saucer-like eyes. She said it reminded her of the famous El Chupacabra from Central and South America, the Mexican goat sucker. But what's weird about this is that as soon as she spotted this thing, it looked at her and made eye contact. And she got the sense it was telling her, how are you seeing me? You're not supposed to be able to see me. And even though she was in the presumed safety of her vehicle, she could have drove off at any moment. She got the sense that if she did not leave, if she stuck around, this thing was going to harm her. And that's very common with witnesses that experience these things, that it's almost as though they're plagued with an uncanny sense of fear, that not as though you're out on a hike and you see a black bear or a moose. That can be frightening. But this is like they walked in or drove into a zone of fear, this irrational fear that they hightail it out of there as fast as they can. And when they get home, they're a little embarrassed and shy about how scared they became, but they really felt at that moment that death would come to them if they didn't hightail it out of there. So possibly this woman did see a chupacabra or just the weirdest looking raccoon you've ever seen. But as I'm running low on time this evening, I'm going to end with a final type of case, a case that you haven't heard me talk about this evening because it's a private home. And a lot of people who contact me about their home being haunted, they don't want it to be known that their house is haunted. And I put this picture last for several reasons. One, out of all the people who contact me about haunted stories, the overwhelming majority of them believe that their house is haunted. Some of them believe who's haunting it. They smell grandma's perfume on her anniversary of her death, or they recognize an old relative walking through. Others have no idea who or what may be haunting it. Some of them are okay with it. Believe it or not, they become accustomed to it. It doesn't bother them. Others would rather get out of there as fast as they can. And they all report very similar occurrences. Weird rapping and knocking on the doors and windows, electrical disturbances, things being moved around, objects going missing and then reappearing in the most obvious of places months or years later. Again, electrical disturbances, bizarre apparitions, odd smells, just all sorts of weird noises. But I put this up there as the last one for the second reason as well, that I hope you take this story with you tonight, because later tonight, when all of you put your head down on your pillows and you hear the wind rustling outside your window, I want you to ask yourself, is it possible, just maybe, that wasn't the wind howling outside your window, and that maybe you too are living in a haunted house? And with that, I wanted to save the last 10 minutes or so that we have for any questions, comments, or stories that any of you might have. You can throw them in the chat room or unmute yourself. But if you want more information, my website has more than you could ever want or need. But I hope your adventure doesn't end here at this program. Grab one of my books, go on your own adventure of Michigan. And when you do, I think you'll discover that you live in one heck of a weird state. And I mean that in a good way. You're going to see things you've never seen. You'll meet some odd people. And along the way, you might just discover that the strangest thing out there is often yourself. So with that, I want to again thank the library for putting this together. It's rare you can come to a program like this at no cost. You can check out a wealth of information from the library, a real treasure for any community. To show my appreciation of how great they are, if you do want to get any of my books, just go to my website, type in the coupon code library. You'll get 20% off just because the libraries are so amazing. So if you like programs like this, let them know so you get more of these. If you didn't like tonight's program, let them know so you get fewer. But either way, this close to Halloween, they put a lot of work into getting me here tonight, and they should be applauded. And thank you all for coming. I'll stop sharing my screen and open it up for any questions or stories.
I see a couple of questions here.
Sure.
It says, do ghosts know about us, the non-dead?
Great question. Simple answer is we have no idea, but we have a lot of theories and speculation, and sometimes the answer would be yes and sometimes no. And what I mean by that is sometimes people tell me that they've encountered a spirit and interacted with it, had an intelligent conference with them, talking, a conversation ensues. But then there are other times where the spirit seems to be unaware of anything in its surroundings, where it does the same thing over and over, almost as though it's on a replay of a recording, focusing on the same thing. People call that a residual haunting, where it's thought to be just some memory of the land or the area that you're picking up on. So I guess the answer is yes and no, depending on who's encountering it and when.
Okay, we have a question from Peter. He wants to know, of all the things you've heard, what is the most probable to actually exist? In your opinion.
Myself, I love sea serpent stories because I think it's quite possible that there's some species that we just haven't found in the lakes and oceans, or perhaps one that was thought to be extinct that is not quite extinct yet. So I think there's some credibility to the possibility of sea serpents. And I try to approach all these things, whether it's hauntings, monsters, UFOs, right down the middle of trying to let the facts sort out fact from fiction. And I never limit myself of saying this thing's too weird, because I always say that when you're dealing with the weird, what is too weird? Where do you draw that line? Are vampires too weird? Are chupacabras too weird? Are hauntings too weird? So I never really rule anything out. And I always take people at face value. If they're telling me they saw something in a graveyard, it's almost impossible for me to prove or disprove that. To them, it actually happened. And I think that's an important part of the whole equation.
Okay, another person commented that the Holly Hotel had a fire this year. And it has been closed for a while they renovate. And she wondered, could this increase paranormal activity?
Yes, and they have had fires prior in their long and sordid history. And oftentimes people think renovations and redoing homes seems to trigger a spirit. And whether it's all the activity, or a lot of people told me that when they were renovating, they felt like the spirits were either happy about it or that they weren't, that they were tearing up their house. They still thought it was theirs. So certainly in times of renovation seems to be heightened to paranormal activity.
Well, that's interesting. We had a comment that Jessica thought that the scariest photo was the picture of the Christmas trees underwater with the boat.
Yes, and the sad part is the crew presumably still in there as well, the ones that didn't wash off, any that were down below in their quarters. they're still there, but a lot of ships now are sacred burial grounds that you're not allowed to go, and you can explore, but you're not allowed to disturb them as their watery graves. So more and more of these places are preserved, and due to the coldness of Lake Michigan at those depths, it acts almost like a freezer, preserving a lot of this material, whether it's a tree or a human body, unfortunately.
Yeah. Robin was wondering, are people haunted and not places necessarily? Is it within the
question.
person?
Yeah, I get both reports. I get reports from people who say no matter where they go, what they're doing, the spirits follow them. Activity seems to be drawn to them like they're a lighthouse beacon. Whereas other people believe it's not only the land or a home or an antique. People contact me saying when they bought this antique, weird things began to happen, so they'll get rid of it. So I don't know, maybe spirits are attached to people, places, things, or all or none of the above.
And Emily wants to know, what's the most terrifying place you've ever been to?
Well, I'm not a fan of Wendigo sightings, which if you're not familiar with the legend of the Wendigo, it's a cannibalistic monster of the North, began with the First Nation people of Canada and made its way to the Great Lakes region of the US. And it's a hideous monster that would devour you during times of famine and cold, when game was nowhere to be found and food was scarce. People resorted to cannibalism, and the Wendigo would show up and devour you. And I was in Alberta, Canada, near Edmonton, just before the COVID pandemic hit a few years back. And I was following in the footsteps of Swift Runner, which if you've never heard of him, don't Google him. You'll be cursing my name. But he was a well-known Wendigo, or a man that was said to have gone Wendigo. And he did some horrible things. And that was one of the creepiest places I had ever been, following his footsteps, where he did his dastardly deeds, where, that was several years ago, but still on cold nights here in Wisconsin, I get a chill from following after Swift Runner. So I don't like those places. I don't like going places where serial killers have been operating. We have Ed Gein and Jeffrey Dahmer in our state. Both places are thought to have a haunted spin to them, and H.H. Holmes in Illinois and John Wayne Gacy. It goes on and on and on. Those are the places I don't like, where the monsters turn out to be like something out of Scooby-Doo, a human. Those are the places I'd rather not go, but yet at the same time, I'm there quite a bit. So I did a book on the most gruesome hauntings of the Midwest, which featured stories of serial killers, mob hits, suicides, untimely deaths, and the like. And for that year I was writing that book, I had the worst nightmares ever, to the point when I finished for the day, I'd throw on a Hallmark Christmas movie to cleanse my palate, that I really needed that. And to this day, after writing that, I'm no longer a fan of horror movies. I just don't like it. Again, I'm throwing on Hallmark to cleanse the palate a little bit.
Okay, we have Kimberly commented on the previous question about, can people be haunted? And she said that could be both people and the land.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have Jean-Luc, I'm assuming, is he says Kings Park Psychiatric Center, which sits about 9 miles west of my university, has been abandoned for almost 30 years. It's been completely vandalized both inside and out for a long time. I have many friends across Long Island who have been there, and sometimes at night there's loud banging sounds whenever someone brings a lantern there. So I'm assuming when he said in Long Island, possibly, is that in New York, or I'm not really sure.
He brings up a great point that you can't throw a rock today without hitting an old asylum or mental health facility or hospital or sanitarium, an old TB place, without it being haunted. That it seems to be any abandoned old large structure that's no longer in operation is a hotbed of paranormal activity. And nowadays you can actually pay to investigate these places and stay overnight at the old insane asylum, as they were called, which a lot of people love doing. A lot of people really enjoy mixing history with mystery, and there's a lot of intrigue in it.
Well, he goes on to say in another comment that his friend Nate from Brooklyn said if you go to Kings Park Psychiatric Center, which he confirms is in by Long Island in New York, if you go there even once, you'll be haunted for many years, or worse yet, for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and that's the fun of, well, I guess fun for some if you have this macabre sense of adventure, that so many of these places, I always state, if you're not getting scared, you're not trying hard enough. They're just downright creepy. But I can't tell you how many people contact me saying bad things happened after they went to these places, from, losing their job to car accidents to breaking up with their significant others. All sorts of weird anomalies seem to take place.
Okay, Ashley asks, what is your favorite piece of equipment to use during investigations?
Great question, Ashley. Years ago, I would bring a truckload of equipment with me. And what I found is that a lot of the time I was missing these legends, the feel of it, where I was so busy setting up the equipment, monitoring it, and breaking it down, that I would miss out on the fun of the legend. So I've cut back quite a bit on quote unquote ghost equipment or paranormal equipment. My favorite piece of equipment is a notebook. I've interviewed people with it. I've gotten directions from it. I've started campfires with it. So I think some people get really dissuaded from television because they see these groups with $20,000 of equipment on the shows, and they think, I don't want to spend $20,000. I may as not even go out. Where some of the best research I think that was ever done was by candlelight, where you'd throw powder on the floor or flour to make sure nobody walked by. So I always say, find the way you like to do it. If you like to use a lot of equipment, motion cameras, trail cameras, EVP recorders, whatever you want, EMF meters and the like. But you don't have to, because there's nothing that I think is going to tell you there's a ghost there. I don't know how it ever got started that, blips of electrical or magnetic fluctuations in the environment turned out to be ghosts. Why aren't they unicorns? We have just as much evidence that they're unicorns as they are ghosts. So I really wish I would have invested in ghost equipment years ago, not as like keeping it, but into the companies, because you could be really retired right now from it.
Yeah. Oh, well, Peter asked, when was the last recorded sighting of the Bray Beast?
Oh, gosh. I've heard people this month say they've seen the Bray Road Beast, and people have campouts out there. There's a well-known farmer that lives just adjacent to Bray Road, and he has all sorts of activity going on his land, and he invites people. They just had a big sleep out there, or a bunch of people had experiences. So it's interesting because Bray Road's a relatively short road, only about 4.5 miles or so in length. And nowadays it's getting more and more developed, which is, with a lot of these legends, that's happening quite a bit. The old enchanted forest is now surrounded by McMansions type thing. And that begs the question of what happens to these legends? What happens to that haunted trail when it's now a Target parking lot? And I think those are fascinating things to see how this folklore morphs and progress throughout the years. That's what I'm really interested in, is what these legends mean to us in a greater context of society, rather than just the scariness of them.
Okay, we have one last comment. Ashley said, I use a notebook for automatic writing and a camera, and that's it anymore. Sometimes the cat ball is cool.
Yeah, and I'm right with you, Ashley. I think it's great. And I think people, too many people contact me and say, how do I get started in this? And they think they have to do it a certain way, where it's not like being a doctor, where you don't have to perform the surgery, because we're not dealing with science per se. We're dealing with speculation and folklore, and the boundaries are a little sketchier and wobblier with this, where I know people that love using a ton of equipment. That's what they enjoy. And that's how they think they're going to collect evidence, where I know some people who don't even bring a camera with them. They're just out to experience the legend, the adventure of it all. So I always tell people, find a way you like and do it that way.
Yeah. And Kimberly said, I'd be good with a recorder to ask questions and a notebook.
Yeah. And just a quick thing on that, Kimberly, is that I used to record all my interviews in the very beginning when I started out. And what I found quite often is that people were hesitant to be recorded. Even if you said, I won't collect the name, I won't use it, you'll be anonymous, keep it confidential. They were very hesitant with something of being recorded, because a lot of people, they don't necessarily want this to get out of their sighting or their beliefs. So by writing it down, I might not be as accurate of getting everything, but there were many times when I'd pull out a recorder and that was it. Like the people clammed up, like, nope, I'm not talking. And for good reason. Today, a lot of people might not know your intentions of what you're going to do with it.
Right.
And,
Well,
you know,
she
when
thought-
you're getting,
Yeah, she thought maybe you could ask, is anyone here, and try to catch voices. Yeah.
oh, sure. A lot of people do that in what are called EVP, electronic voice phenomena, where people will have recorders and they'll ask questions and then pause, waiting for an answer that's not audible to the naked ear, and then ask more. And then when they play them back, oftentimes they'll find what they think are, voices answering them. So yes, that's quite great. Or to get your thoughts as you're walking around, if you want to remember or keep something significant with you. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the last question. I just kind of want to point out to the people that attended tonight that the Lyon Township Public Library does have a ghost hunting kit in its library of things. And so if you want to stop by and check that out, if it's checked out, you can put a hold on it. Well, thank you so much, Chad. I think it was very enjoyable. Everyone seemed to have a good time. We had several comments of appreciation and thanks in the comments. So really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And keep an eye out, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.